The sensor array hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration aboard the Zorn survey ship Nthka. Vrix, a junior technician with mottled gray skin and 4 articulated fingers, slouched at his monitoring station. His specialized sensory tendrils drooped with boredom, skimming through endless star charts and planetary scans that blended into a monotonous stream of data. Most junior Zorn technicians dreamed of discovering something remarkable, a rare mineral planet, an advanced civilization ripe for integration, or at least an interesting stellar phenomenon. Vrix had long since abandoned such fantasies. 7 standard cycles into his survey rotation, he had become nothing more than a data processing machine, his once sharp neural connections dulled by repetition. That's why the anomaly almost slipped past him. A barely perceptible fluctuation in the long-range scanners caught his secondary visual receptor. Most would have dismissed it. A trick of quantum interference, perhaps, or a minor calibration error. But something made Vrix pause, his tendrils suddenly rigid with attention. He initiated a secondary scan, routing the data through multiple verification protocols. The planet materialized on his display. Third from a yellow-white star, atmospheric composition surprisingly compatible with carbon-based life. Initial readings suggested primitive technological development. No orbital infrastructure, minimal radio emissions, basic planetary communication networks. Vrix's preliminary report wrote itself with practiced efficiency. Survey classification, emerging pre-industrial civilization. Technological rating, Class 7, minimal spaceflight potential. Recommendation, passive observation, potential future integration. He had no way of knowing that those few lines of text would become the most consequential data transmission in recent galactic history. 50,000 kilometers above the planet's surface, hidden within a carefully constructed sensor shadow, Nthka's advanced stealth systems continued their passive surveillance. The planet, designated He-742 in Zorn star charts, but known to its inhabitants as New Texas Colony, seemed utterly unremarkable. In the colony's primary settlement, a sprawling complex of modular habitation units and industrial infrastructure, Captain Elena Rodriguez reviewed the day's resource allocation reports. Her office, a converted shipping container that served as both command center and living quarters, reflected her practical nature. Mounted weapon components sat beside agricultural yield charts, a worn photograph of her grandmother, a guerrilla fighter from Earth's last major continental conflict, watched from a makeshift shrine. Rodriguez didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. Her communication officer, Lieutenant Marcus Okoro, burst through the door, datapad in hand. "Captain, we've got something weird on the long-range scanners. Something's watching us." Rodriguez's hand instinctively moved to the modified mining laser mounted on her desk, a reminder that in the outer colonies, survival was never guaranteed. Her eyes, steel gray and calculating, locked onto the datapad's display. The Zorn believed they were invisible. They were wrong. First contact was about to become first conflict. Representative Krillax of the Zorn Collective adjusted the neural dampeners on his ceremonial diplomatic exoskeleton. The pristine white carapace was a marvel of biomechanical engineering, each segment polished to reflect the absolute superiority of Zorn technology. Holographic displays danced around his sensory clusters, providing real-time tactical and cultural analysis of the primitive species he was about to negotiate with. The diplomatic shuttle descended through New Texas Colony's atmosphere with calculated precision. Stealth-capable combat drones formed a protective perimeter, their weapon systems calibrated to neutralize any potential resistance in milliseconds. Krillax had overseen the subjugation of 47 emerging civilizations. This would be no different. Inside the colony's primary reception hall, Dr. Aiden Chen stood beside Captain Rodriguez, his fingers dancing subtly over a modified tablet. To the Zorn, it would appear to be a primitive communication device. In reality, it was a sophisticated sensor array deliberately designed to look archaic. "They're approaching with exactly 17 support drones," Chen whispered. Typical Zorn first contact formation. Defensive spread of 3.2 kilometers. Weapon ranges suggests a complete neutralization capability within 2.7 seconds of any resistance. Rodriguez's lips curved into a slight smile. Predictable. The hull itself was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Seemingly crude industrial materials were arranged with mathematical precision. What looked like random industrial equipment stood in carefully calculated positions, each piece a potential defensive position, each placement a tactical advantage. Krillax entered with practiced condescension. His universal translator rendered his words with clinical precision. Inhabitants of designation HC 742, I represent the Zorn Collective. Your technological development has been noted. We offer protectorate status, a generous intervention that will elevate your species from your current, primitive state. The translation algorithm failed to capture the layers of contempt embedded in the original Zorn dialect. Lieutenant Marcus Okoro, physician near the colony's communication systems, suppressed a barely perceptible smile. Each word from the Zorn representative was being parsed, analyzed, translated through multiple linguistic and cultural filters. Every gesture, every subtle inflection was being recorded with microscopic precision. Dr. Chen stepped forward, his movements calculated. We appreciate your interest, he said, each word chosen with surgical precision. Perhaps we could discuss the specifics of this proposed relationship. Krillax's sensory tendrils vibrated with what passed for amusement among his species. The humans were following the expected protocol. Initial compliance, followed by submissive negotiation. Standard procedure for emerging civilizations. He had no idea of the trap being prepared. Rodriguez watched her grandmother's photograph, a reminder of humanity's long history of resistance, seeming to watch from her office. Every system in the colony was now operating on a carefully orchestrated plan. Water recycling systems modified to create electromagnetic interference. Mining lasers recalibrated as potential weapons. Communication networks transformed into a living, breathing defensive organism. The Zorn believed they were conducting a standard integration protocol. In reality, they were walking into a meticulously prepared ambush. First contact was never going to be what they expected. The first wave of Zorn colonization began with the subtlety of a surgical strike. Resource extraction permits appeared on colonial administration screens. Communication network access points were subtly manipulated. Infrastructure control points received increasingly restrictive directives, each one designed to slowly erode human autonomy. Sophia Rice sat in the colony's communication center, her fingers flying across a modified communication console that looked far more primitive than its true capabilities. To the casual Zorn observer, it appeared to be a standard colonial communication hub. In reality, it was a living, breathing intelligence-gathering system that transformed every incoming directive into a roadmap of Zorn weaknesses. Got something, she muttered to her team. A junior technician, Marcos Rodriguez, no relation to the colony's captain, but cut from the same determined cloth, leaned in close. The Zorn believed they were implementing a standard colonization protocol. They were wrong. Each restrictive directive became a learning opportunity. When the Zorn attempted to limit water distribution rights, the colony's engineering teams immediately began developing alternative water extraction and purification methods. The resource management became a complex dance of apparent compliance and hidden resistance. In the agricultural sectors, farmers began modifying farming equipment. Irrigation systems were subtly reinforced. Harvesting machines were redesigned with additional structural integrity. What looked like standard maintenance was actually a massive distributed defensive preparation. Dr. Aiden Chen's Sino strategic analysis team worked around the clock. Every Zorn communication was a puzzle, every directive a potential weakness to exploit. They mapped communication protocols, identified technological blind spots, and prepared a response that would be anything but submission. The colony transformed, becoming a living organism of resistance. Children were integrated into the preparation, not as soldiers, but as observers and intelligence gatherers. School curricula subtly shifted to include advanced problem-solving, communication encryption, and adaptive thinking. What the Zorn saw as a primitive educational system was actually a comprehensive resistance training program. Sophia's breakthrough came during a seemingly routine communication intercept. A minor frequency variance in Zorn communication protocols revealed something extraordinary, a fundamental weakness in their hierarchical communication system. "It's beautiful," she whispered, showing the analysis to Captain Rodriguez. "They've got a critical vulnerability in their command structure. Their centralized communication means that if we can create the right kind of interference, we can essentially blind them." The colony's defensive preparation wasn't just about weapons. It was about turning every system, every individual, into a potential point of resistance. Manufacturing teams began producing what appeared to be standard industrial equipment, each piece subtly modified to serve a defensive purpose. Rodriguez studied the developing plan. Her grandmother's lessons of guerrilla resistance echoed in her mind. Never fight the enemy on their terms. Create your own battlefield. The Zorn thought they were implementing a colonization protocol. In reality, they were walking into a trap decades in the making. Resistance wasn't just coming. Resistance was already here. The underground research facility stretched beneath the new Texas colony like a hidden nervous system of innovation. Dr. Aiden Chen stood before a holographic display, his hands moving through complex gesture controls that transformed captured Zorn technology into something entirely new. "We're not just reverse engineering," Chen explained to Captain Rodriguez. "We're reimagining." Scattered across workstations, teams of engineers, scientists, and former military specialists worked with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Mining lasers lay disassembled, their components meticulously studied and transformed. Communication arrays were stripped down and rebuilt, their core technologies twisted into adaptive communication and electronic warfare platforms. Lieutenant Marcus Okoro oversaw a team working on adaptive camouflage technologies. What began as a simple mineral processing scanner had been transformed into a near-perfect holographic disruption system. Small drones, cobbled together from agricultural monitoring equipment and salvaged communication relays, now carried capabilities that would make the Zorn's stealth technologies look primitive. "Look at this," Okoro said, activating a small drone. Its exterior shifted through multiple textures and colors, mimicking the surrounding environment with chameleon-like precision. "We're not just hiding. We're becoming invisible." The colony's preparation went far beyond technology. Every citizen became part of an integrated defense strategy. Agricultural workers learned advanced communication encryption. School children practiced problem-solving scenarios that doubled as tactical training. Even the colony's waste management systems were being redesigned to provide potential defensive capabilities. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a brilliant materials scientist and no relation to the colony's captain, presented her latest breakthrough. "Traditional armor is static," she explained, revealing a new composite material. "Ours will be alive, adaptive, self-repairing." The material she demonstrated looked like nothing more than a simple metallic sheet, but when subjected to simulated weapon impacts, it changed. Microscopic structures realigned, dispersing energy, healing damage in real time. What the Zorn would see as a simple defensive coating was actually a revolutionary approach to material science. "We're fighting a war on multiple fronts," Captain Rodriguez said during a strategy briefing. "Technological, psychological, informational. Our greatest weapon isn't our technology. It's our ability to adapt." The training programs were equally innovative. Simulation chambers transformed standard industrial spaces into complex tactical environments. Every citizen learned multiple skills: how to repair critical infrastructure, how to communicate using encrypted methods, how to transform everyday equipment into defensive tools. Chen's team made perhaps the most significant breakthrough. By studying the quantum communication protocols of the Zorn technology, they discovered a fundamental weakness in their communication network. It wasn't just about creating a counter-technology. It was about understanding the very philosophy of their potential enemy. They think in hierarchies, Chen explained. We think in networks. Distributed. Adaptive. Where they see a chain of command, we see a web of possibilities. The colony was no longer just a human settlement. It had become a living, breathing, defensive organism. The Zorn believed they were preparing to subjugate a primitive colony. They had no idea what was coming. The first blow came not with a weapon, but with silence. At precisely 3:47 hours colony time, every Zorn communication channel simultaneously went dark. What appeared to be a simple communications failure was, in fact, a meticulously orchestrated attack that would become known as the Ghost Protocol. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched from the colony's primary command center, her augmented tactical display showing the unfolding operation with crystal clarity. Lieutenant Marcus Okoro sat beside her, his fingers dancing across a modified interface that looked like nothing more than an antiquated control panel. Target acquisition confirmed, Okoro murmured. All systems green. The Zorn invasion force hung in orbit, supremely confident in their technological superiority. Their stealth systems, advanced beyond most known galactic standards, should have made them invisible, should have made them invincible. They were wrong. The first wave of the human counterattack was psychological. Holographic projections began to appear across multiple Zorn communication and sensor platforms. Images that seemed to be internal Zorn communications, but were actually carefully crafted pieces of disinformation. Each projection was a precision-guided piece of psychological warfare designed to create maximum confusion and doubt. Dr. Aiden Chen's team had spent months studying Zorn communication protocols. They understood not just the technical aspects, but the deep cultural and psychological frameworks that underpinned Zorn military thinking. Each holographic projection was a surgical strike against the Zorn's sense of operational security. On the planet's surface, what appeared to be standard colonial infrastructure began to transform. Mining lasers repositioned themselves with impossible precision. Agricultural drones reconfigured into defensive platforms. Even the colony's water recycling systems became potential weapons. The Zorn commander, Supreme Tactical Coordinator Nexar, watched in growing confusion as his tactical displays became increasingly unreliable. Sensor ghosts appeared and disappeared. Communication channels fragmented and reformed in patterns that defied logical analysis. Impossible, Nexar muttered, his neural tendrils writhing with increasing agitation. Rodriguez's voice cut through the command channel, calm and precise. You're not dealing with a primitive colony anymore. The human counterattack was a multi-layered assault that struck at every possible vulnerability. Captured Zorn communication technologies were turned against their creators. Quantum communication channels were hijacked and flooded with deliberately constructed noise that looked like legitimate military communications. Most critically, the humans had identified and exploited a fundamental weakness in Zorn military doctrine: their absolute belief in technological superiority. Okoro highlighted a critical tactical readout. They haven't even realized we're attacking yet, he said, a hint of dark humor in his voice. Small drones, seemingly agricultural monitoring equipment, began to move with impossible precision. What looked like standard industrial lasers repositioned themselves, their true capabilities now revealed. The entire colony was transforming into a living, breathing weapon. The Zorn invasion force, so confident in their technological supremacy, was about to learn a brutal lesson. Humanity was done being underestimated. The news spread through galactic communication networks like a quantum wildfire. The Zorn Collective, an empire that had systematically subjugated 47 sentient species, crushed 32 planetary resistances, and maintained a reputation of absolute technological superiority, had been fundamentally challenged by a single human colony. On the communication hub of Vex Prime, a massive data processing center that served as the primary information exchange for 17 distinct galactic civilizations, Senior Analyst Krelks watched the initial reports with mounting disbelief. The holographic displays flickered with fragmented transmissions, each more impossible than the last. "This cannot be accurate," Krelx muttered, his multispectral sensory tendrils vibrating with agitation. But the data was undeniable. The human colony designated HC-742, a world the Zorn had classified as a pre-industrial settlement, had not only resisted invasion, but had systematically dismantled the most advanced tactical assault force in the Zorn Collective's recent history. Within hours, the initial reports transformed into a cascade of detailed analysis. The humans hadn't just defended themselves. They had turned the Zorn's own technologies against them with a level of adaptive innovation that defied conventional understanding. Deep within the Zorn Collective's internal communication networks, the first tremors of panic began to spread. Supreme Tactical Coordinator Nexar found himself before the Zorn High Council, attempting to explain how a primitive human colony had completely neutralized an invasion force that should have been overwhelmingly superior. The council chambers, typically a bastion of calm technological superiority, now buzzed with an unprecedented level of uncertainty. "They adapted our own technologies faster than we could modify our attack protocols," Nexar reported, his neural tendrils displaying a combination of shame and barely contained terror. "Our quantum communication networks were compromised within minutes. Our stealth systems became irrelevant. The implications were catastrophic. Other subjugated species began to take notice. The Kreltheri, a silicon-based civilization that had been under Zorn control for 7 generations, started subtle communications with resistance cells. The Void Runners, a nomadic species that had long survived by avoiding direct conflict, began sharing the human transmissions through their encrypted communication networks. What had begun as a local conflict was rapidly becoming a potential galactic revolution. Dr. Aiden Chen, watching from the human colony, understood the deeper strategy. This wasn't just about defending their world. This was about fundamentally challenging the existing galactic power structure. "Information is our most powerful weapon," he told Captain Rodriguez. "We're not just fighting the Zorn. We're showing every subjugated species that resistance is possible." The human colony's communication specialists began carefully crafting transmissions. Each message was a precise piece of psychological warfare, demonstrating not just their defensive capabilities, but their fundamental philosophy of adaptation and collective intelligence. On worlds across multiple star systems, oppressed populations began to whisper a new phrase: "If the humans can do it, so can we." The Zorn Collective had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And now, the entire galaxy was watching. The Zorn Collective's response was as predictable as it was devastating, or so they believed. A secondary invasion force arrived, 3 times the size of the initial assault. Massive battleships bristling with weapons that could obliterate entire continents. Quantum disruptors capable of shattering planetary infrastructure. Genetic warfare platforms designed to neutralize entire biological populations. Supreme Tactical Coordinator Nexar watched from the command vessel Nthka Prime, confident that this overwhelming show of force would crush the human resistance once and for all. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched their approach with calculated calm. "They're using standard grid pattern assault formation," Dr. Aiden Chen observed, his fingers dancing across a holographic display that looked like nothing more than an industrial monitoring system. Exactly what our initial simulations predicted. The human colony had become something more than a mere settlement. It was a living, breathing defensive organism. Every citizen was now part of an integrated resistance network. Farmers had transformed agricultural equipment into defensive platforms. Communication specialists had turned local networks into a quantum-level information warfare system. The first wave of the Zorn assault began with electromagnetic pulse attacks designed to neutralize planetary infrastructure. Massive energy discharges that should have reduced the colony's technological capabilities to rubble. Nothing happened. The Zorn battleship's sensors reported complete system neutralization. Their tactical displays showed a planet stripped of defensive capabilities. They were wrong. What appeared to be system failure was actually the most sophisticated adaptive defense network ever conceived. The colony's infrastructure had been designed to not just survive, but to thrive under attack. Each system had multiple redundancies, each network a self-healing organism that could reconfigure faster than the Zorn could analyze. Lieutenant Marcus Okoro's team had spent months preparing for this moment. The colony's communication networks were no longer simply communication systems. They were weapons. Initiating counter-transmission, Okoro said, his voice calm. The Zorn battleships suddenly found their own communication networks flooded, not with simple interference, but with precisely crafted data packages that looked like legitimate internal communications. Tactical reports that suggested total system compromise. Strategic directives that created maximum confusion. Nexar watched in growing horror as his invasion force began to tear itself apart. Ships responded to falsified orders. Tactical networks became increasingly fragmented. The more the Zorn tried to regain control, the more chaotic their systems became. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the colony's materials scientist, revealed her most significant breakthrough. The planet's very infrastructure had been transformed. What looked like standard industrial equipment was actually an adaptive defensive network. Minerals mined from the planet's crust had been engineered into materials that could absorb, redirect, and neutralize energy weapons. "We're not just defending," she told Chen. "We're turning their attack into our weapon." The Zorn had believed they were launching an overwhelming assault. In reality, they were walking into a trap decades in the making. Humanity was done being a victim. They were now the architects of their own destiny. The final confrontation was never going to be a simple battle. As the remnants of the Zorn invasion force descended into chaos, Captain Elena Rodriguez stood in the colony's primary command center, watching the unfolding scenario with a calculated calm that belied the magnitude of what was happening. Dr. Aiden Chen approached, a holographic display dancing between his fingers. "We're doing more than just defending," he said. "We're exposing the fundamental weakness of their entire civilization." The broadcast began. Across every Zorn communication channel, through every quantum transmission network, the humans began to disseminate something far more powerful than weapons. They shared the Zorn collective's own suppressed historical records, centuries of manipulation, of systematic oppression of emerging civilizations, of a hierarchical system that crushed individual creativity and innovation. The psychological warfare was surgical. Supreme Tactical Coordinator Nexar watched in growing horror as the Zorn's carefully maintained narrative of galactic superiority began to crumble. The transmission wasn't just information, it was a complete deconstruction of the Zorn's cultural mythology. Lieutenant Marcus Okoro had prepared for this moment for years. The transmission included not just raw data, but carefully contextualized information that would resonate with the Zorn's client species. Encrypted within the broadcasts were communication protocols that allowed subjugated civilizations to communicate freely for the first time. "We're not just fighting," Rodriguez explained to her team. "We're creating a new framework for galactic interaction." The colony itself had become something more than a defensive position. It was a proof of concept, a living demonstration that technological superiority meant nothing without adaptability, without the capacity for true innovation. Diplomatic representatives from other galactic civilizations watched in awe. The humans had done something unprecedented. They hadn't just defended themselves, they had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. The Zorn collective's internal communication networks began to fragment. Client species started to communicate, to organize, to imagine possibilities they had never considered before. What had begun as a local conflict was transforming into a galactic revolution. Dr. Elena Rodriguez revealed the final piece of their strategy. The adaptive materials they had developed weren't just defensive technologies. They represented a completely new approach to technological development. Systems that could learn, adapt, and transform in real time. "Technology isn't about superiority," she told the assembled team. "It's about potential, about growth." As the final Zorn ships retreated, something extraordinary happened. The human colony began broadcasting open invitations to other subjugated species, not as conquerors, but as potential partners. Shared research protocols, open communication networks, a fundamentally different approach to galactic interaction. "They call this primitive," Captain Rodriguez said, watching the final transmissions, "until they saw us fight. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had arrived, and they were just getting started."